Episode 46. By winning the Masters in 1986, Jack Nicklaus became the oldest winner of the tournament at age 46. Many think the Great Depression was prolonged by constant government intervention. And in 1946, the United States embarked on the Great Destimulus, drastically dropping government spending. This resulted in the fastest turnaround from deficit to surplus. At the time, many thought unemployment would skyrocket, when in fact it stayed below 4.5%. This allowed the United States to continue its march forward as the rising world power, and this very interesting piece of history lent strength to the argument for free economies. Beyond MD, episode 46, here we go! Hey everyone, thank you again for making the time to join me on Beyond MD. Today's episode covers the FHSA, the First Home Savings Account. I do think this plan is going to be relevant to many Canadians, and my guest for the episode is Stefan Scott, who is a fee-for-service financial planner. Many of you will already know him from the Physician Financial Independence group on Facebook. I have to give a shout out to Steph here because he brought up the FHSA before it was on my radar. He was the first person to bring it up, and over time he's done a lot of learning on this plan, and frankly, he's one of the most knowledgeable people that I know when it comes to the FHSA. So with Steph, we're going to do a deep dive. We're going to talk about eligibility, contributions, tax deductions, transferring from the FHSA to your registered accounts, investment strategies, withdrawals, the home buyer's plan with the RRSP, and how the FHSA differs from that, and how parents and grandparents can also get involved in contributing for their children. And this plan is interesting because it's not just for people who are aspiring to buy a home. As long as you're eligible, you can open up a plan and benefit in different ways, and there are strategies that Steph will touch upon as we go through the episode. So Stefan is an independent fee-for-service, flat-fee financial planner. His wife, Sarah, is an emergency physician, and interestingly, Sarah and I graduated the same year from medical school at UBC. They have 3 wonderful kids, 2 boys and 1 daughter. Now, one thing that Steph is really passionate about is teaching, and this started for him when he was at the University of Victoria, where he was awarded the Gillian Sherwin Alumni Award, which is the highest honor for teaching excellence at the university, and he has carried this forward into his day-to-day financial planning. Steph loves to empower others with knowledge, and he wants to make sure that his clients all understand the rationale for their decisions. Steph has been an active and very valued member of the Physician Financial Independence Facebook group since 2018. Interestingly, he's also a part-time paid on-call firefighter and first responder with Comox Fire Rescue, and more on teaching. So Steph in January 2021 put together an amazing YouTube video. So if you are wanting to get a grasp of the basics when it comes to personal finance, do check out this video. The link is in the show notes. It is called Smart Money: Things They Should Have Taught Us in High School. It was initially created for his fire hall colleagues and then expanded, was shared with members of PFI, was really well received. And this was in fact one of the stepping stones for him as he launched into the next phase of his life, which is financial planning. So enough with the intro. Here's my conversation with Stefan Scott on the FHSA. Hey, Steph. Honestly, it's so good to be sitting down with you today. You know, we connected a couple of years ago, I know, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. So how are you and where are you right now?
Thanks, Yatin. Yeah, this is great. I'm really excited about having this chat with you. Today, I am in my home office in beautiful British Columbia. I'm located on Vancouver Island in the Comox Valley in the little town of Comox.
Okay, I love it. Steph, so one thing about Vancouver Island is my family and I, we have become completely infatuated with Tofino. We went out there in 2018 first. It was in October, lucked out with the most phenomenal weather. It was like high teens, and we said we're definitely going to come and visit, and we went back last May. And one day it's going to be amazing to just get our families connected. I know we've had virtual conversations, but it'd be great to finally meet up with you in person.
Yeah, I know I missed you last time you were on the island, but yeah, there's so many amazing spots here. I don't want to let too many of the secrets out because it starts to get crowded when people hear about what we have here on Vancouver Island.
Oh, it's such a magical place, And, you know, just this time of year, there's so much stuff going on. Like I always tell people jokingly that my productivity just dips so hard when the NHL playoffs start. I'm not sure if my team, the Penguins, are going to make it. We're like right on the cusp right now. But you have pretty rosy things ahead being an Edmonton Oilers fan, right? You are an Oilers fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I've been an Oilers fan I'm going to date myself here, but really since 1980, we were traveling across the country. I was about 7 or 8 years old, and we stopped in Edmonton to visit some family. And of course, like any Canadian 8-year-old kid, I was crazy about hockey, played hockey. And our friend said, hey, Wayne Gretzky's signing autographs at a little mall in Edmonton. Does Stefan want to go? Sure. So I didn't even have like my autograph book with me. I grabbed a sheet of paper, stood in line patiently. You know, Gretzky's probably 20 years old at this point, right? He's been an Oiler for about a year or two. The team is just developing. I get up there and I just stare at him and I hand him the sheet of paper and he looks at me, signs the sheet of paper. He pats me on the head and says, how you doing, sport?
Oh my God.
And I was just starstruck. I just stared at him with my mouth open and then walked away. So since then I've been a lifelong Oilers fan. And of course, what a heyday back in the late 80s. But yes, an exciting team this year. I do have to mention that watching them beat Calgary last year was phenomenal. That brought back memory.
Yeah.
A long time ago. So I'll stop there before I anger any other Calgary fans.
Well, you know what's funny about that comment is I recently looked into, I don't check my stats too often for the podcast, but I checked out some geographical downloads, and it turns out that Calgary is the second most popular city in terms of listeners for my podcast, which is, I think it has to do with me maybe working there a year. So there are people going to be listening to that comment stuff, but it's all good. It's all good. I don't think Calgary is making the playoffs this year, or they're on the cusp as well. But anyways, I think you guys have a good shot this year. But Steph, so I connected with you on PFI years ago, and I've been following you on PFI since. And I have to say, I find your comments very well thought out, very insightful, really, really informative. And then it was just over a year ago, you were the first one to bring up the FHSA, which is what we're going to talk about today, the first home buyers or the first home savings account. And that's why I wanted to have you on. But just before we talk about our topic stuff, I know you also have like a very interesting path. You've learned a lot about finance kind of along the way. Do you want to just 30 seconds, just tell us a little bit about yourself? I want to give you that chance.
Sure. Yeah. I've been interested in personal finances, since I was a teenager. And that's, it's been a lifelong passion and interest of mine. The pandemic kind of really put us all in unique spots in different ways. But what I found myself doing back in early or late 2020, I was asked by my fire chief here at Comox Fire Rescue. I'm a part-time paid-on-call firefighter. I call it my free superhero training. So it's great department here.
Oh, that's amazing.
And they asked me to put together a little video or a teachable session on finances. So I put together this video called Smart Money, Things They Should Have Taught Us in High School but Didn't. And it went over well with my department. We posted it. And I think I put a link on PFI. And all of a sudden, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people had watched this thing. And wow, the feedback I got was good. People were enjoying it. I try to keep principles simple so that everyone can understand and get insight into things. So that kind of springboarded me and helped me firm up my decision to move into financial planning professionally. So that was a real impetus for that. So since then, I've been doing this now for a couple of years. I work primarily with physicians. Part of my approach is to bring in an educational component because I really think people should understand and know what they're doing with their money. What's the reasoning? What's the rationale? What's the evidence behind this suggestion versus that suggestion? And of course, helping people plan out their financial lives so that hopefully they can enjoy life today, but also be wise about planning for the future.
Hey, that's amazing because I think the educational part is really important, Steph, because if we understand the rationale for certain decisions, I think when times get tough, we will be more likely to stick things out for the long term anyway. So that's my belief.
Absolutely.
Okay, FHSA, the first home savings account. Maybe you can give us a broad overview of this account, what it's all about, and then we can pick away at the details.
Sure. Yeah. So the first home savings account, it went live just a little while back on April 1st, 2023. It's really a wildly tax efficient account. So you want to start thinking about this account right up there with the RRSP and the TFSA. Its purpose is really to help Canadian residents save up in a really tax efficient manner to buy a house in the future or to build a home. In general, you can contribute up to $8,000 a year for up to 5 years. So there's a $40,000 lifetime maximum per person. And it's really a hybrid of those two other registered accounts I mentioned. Money goes in as if you were contributing to an RRSP. You can get a tax break on that against your personal income. And if you're using the money to purchase or build a house, it comes out like a TFSA, totally tax-free. So the principal you put in and any gains, 100% tax-free. So tax break going in, tax break coming out, it's pretty amazing.
That does sound amazing. Now, in terms of who can open one up, Steph, is there a floor or ceiling for age? Can you talk to us about who's eligible to open one up? And then the one thing I really want to nail down on here is, like, what constitutes a first-time home buyer? Because I do want people to make sure they walk away from this episode understanding that.
Yeah, good question. There's two things, and I want to delineate. There's two ways times you have to qualify. One is, do I qualify to open the account? Because that's a separate and distinct question. And I'll talk more about the second part later on, which is, do I qualify to make a withdrawal? So there's two different sort of parameters going on. So yeah, let's talk about who can open an account. In general, you have to be a Canadian resident between the ages of 18 to 71. And it's a bit different in some provinces, BC, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and the three territories. It's 19 because their age of majority is a year older. But in essence, 18 or 19 to age 71. The big rule is that you have to have not owned a home in the last 5 years and lived in it as your primary residence. And if you have a spouse or a common-in-law partner, if they've owned a home and you've lived in it in the last 5 years, that would also disqualify you. So basically, if you've not owned and lived in that home for the last 5 years, you're able to open up a first home savings account. There is a couple of interesting twists with regards to that rule. So I'll just highlight a couple of things.
Yeah, please.
It doesn't mean you've never owned a home. I could have owned a home 10 years ago, and if I sold it or moved out for some reason and had a 5-year window where I haven't, I would still qualify. Mm-hmm. So folks that have owned previously and are currently renters for the last 5 years, they would still qualify.
Okay.
The other interesting thing is you can actually currently own a home as long as it's an income property or a rental unit. If you're not living in it as your primary residence, it's strictly a rental income property, you're still able to qualify to open up the first home savings account.
Way.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Steph, I did not know that. That's amazing. I feel like every week I learn something new about this account.
Yeah, there's a lot of little nuances with it, that's for sure.
Okay, that's really interesting. So now, let's say one is eligible and they go ahead and open an account. Technically speaking, and I know this will be important when we talk more about the investment side of things, but how long can you keep an account open for?
Yeah, there is a maximum cap. So 15 years, that's the length, the most time you can keep it open. Or if you hit age 71 before the 15 years, you have to wind up the account the year you turn 71. So there is a cap on that. The other thing I should mention is, to open one of these, if you qualify, you do not have to have some kind of firm timeline or idea that you are buying a home at some point. As long as you qualify, hey, you can open up one of these accounts.
Now, the contributions you mentioned, so annually $8,000, lifetime $40,000, but let's say there are years where you can't make the full contribution. What are we able to do in terms of carrying forward our contributions with this account?
Yeah, that's right. So there is, to an extent, the ability to carry forward the contributions, but the maximum is carrying forward $8,000 of those unused contribution rooms. So first of all, you have to open an account to start the clock. So not everybody who's over 18 and qualifies, they're not gaining contribution room. You have to go in or go online and open a first home savings account to initiate the clock starting on this. But let's say you do that and you're unable to contribute this year. Come 2024, that's okay. You can carry forward $8,000 and then you'll get a new $8,000 of room January 1st. But if you don't contribute at all in 2024, you're going to start losing the room. So the maximum you could carry forward is $8,000 a year. So if you're not careful and you open an account and you do nothing for 5 years, you could find yourself in year 5 with only $16,000 of total room, and you would have lost out on the other part.
Okay.
Yeah.
A limited ability to carry forward contributions. Now, let's say the other extreme. Let's say we're not keeping track of how much we're contributing and we over-contribute. What are the implications there?
Yeah, there are penalties for that. So it's the same penalty as the RRSP and the TFSA. So if you make an over-contribution, the CRA will fine you 1% per month. So that's 12% per year, which is pretty expensive. So when you're making those contributions, keep track somewhere. Make sure you don't go over, because that can be costly.
So we know that the contributions are tax deductible. Now, the tax deduction, I'm assuming you don't have to claim that deduction the same year and that you can carry that forward, because this could be useful, right, Steph, for a medical trainee who's maybe not earning their full income right now. You contribute now, you can claim those tax deductions later on. But I'm wondering how far forward or can you wait, or how long can you wait before you start actually claiming those tax deductions?
Yeah, based on the wording now, you can defer the claiming against your taxes, like you said, as far into the future as you want. So right now, there's no limit. You might even at some point use the money to buy a house and wind up the account. Theoretically, you could continue to defer claiming that contribution against your taxes. But usually there's a window that you want to be thinking about the first few years. And you're right. Let's say someone's finishing up residency this year, and July 1st, they start working as staff somewhere. Their income takes a significant boost. It probably would be in their best interest to not claim the deduction this year. Go ahead, make the $8,000 contribution, put the money into something, but wait till you get that big full year of staff income before you make the claim, because you'll get that much more bang on your tax buck when you do that. Oh, I should also mention that claiming the deductions, it's based on the calendar year. So it's January 1 to December 31st. There's no confusing 60-day overlap rule like with an RRSP, which I think is good because that trips a lot of people up. It's just January 1st, December 31st, what goes in, and then you can claim it when you want in the future. Speaking
of the RRSP, can you talk to us a bit about transferring from an RRSP to an FHSA and then vice versa? Like, what do we need to know about the transfer process?
Yes, you can make transfers, direct transfers from certain types of registered accounts into the first home savings account and vice versa. If you were to transfer from your RRSP, it's not going to be tax deductible a second time, because presumably you've already claimed that deduction through the RRSP. That would be double dipping if you did that. The other thing to note, if you do that, you're going to lose the RRSP room forever. So if you transfer out of your RRSP into your first home savings account, there's no way to regain the, for example, $8,000 that you transferred over. When might you want to do this? Is there any advantage to that? The scenario I can think of is if someone has a fairly healthy RRSP and they just can't come up with extra money for the first home savings account, and they know they're imminently, looking to purchase a home in the next few years, then maybe it might make sense to do that and try to transfer over. And then the benefit there is that when you've transferred from your RRSP over, you're not on the hook to pay it back. Whereas, and I think I'll talk about this a little later, the RRSP home buyers plan, you have to pay back. So there's very specific circumstances where you might want to do that. If you have a RIF, you cannot transfer from an RRIF into your first home savings account. Yeah. So I think that sums up the two main registered accounts and what you're allowed to do with transfers.
That's amazing. Now, let's say you transfer from the RRSP to the FHSA, and then eventually you need to pull that out towards the purchase of a first home or building your first home. Whatever you pull out, though, even though it was transferred from the RRSP, I guess you're not paying any tax on that withdrawal if it's from the FHSA, right?
Correct. If it's going towards a qualifying home purchase or build, there's no taxation. Yeah. If you find yourself in the future simply not using the money and you're taking it out for personal income, you will be taxed at that point.
Before I forget, because, I didn't think about this question before, but So the money that you pull out from the FHSA, for it to be a tax-free withdrawal, it has to be used towards either the purchase of your first home, right? Or building your home. What about other home-related expenditures? Like, I never thought about this before, but what about furniture for your house, things like that? Renovations after you buy a home. Like, are there set guidelines for this stuff that we know of yet?
Well, the CRA does use the word to either purchase a qualifying home or build it, or for furnishing. So it's interesting that you brought that up. So that would qualify. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you're pulling out your $40,000, obviously that's probably going to go mostly towards a down payment. But as long as your down payment is greater than that amount, that would be an eligible and a qualifying withdrawal. I think something else to mention is, what if you find for some reason over time you end up not buying a house or not taking the money out to use it, and the 15-year window comes to an end? What can you do? Well, there's an amazing option that you can actually transfer the full sum of your first home savings account into your RRSP. So that's a way to not incur any taxation. You roll it into your RRSP. It's a tax deferred move, and you don't need RRSP contribution room. So that's really quite an amazing thing. Whether or not you have contribution room, it will not count towards it. So if you've got 50 grand in your FHSA, you can pop it into your RRSP and keep that going with 100% tax deferred growth. Okay.
So in a way, if you open up the FHSA and you did not buy a home or build a home, then you have the option to supersize your RRSP essentially.
Yeah, it's a good RRSP boost. And, if you think about that a little more carefully, that could be quite a strategic use of the account. And I'll talk about that a little later when we get to investing and strategies.
Last thing about transfers is, what about moving money from a spouse's RRSP into an FHSA? So what do we need to know about that? Because I think there are some timeline issues here.
Right. So attribution rules would apply. So let's say you are contributing to your spouse's RRSP, their spousal RRSP. You have to let the 3 years go by before your spouse or partner could use the money out of their spousal RRSP to directly transfer into the first home savings account. Okay, so it's a bit tricky there, and that might seem like a long amount of time, but if you don't wait for those 3 calendar years to go by, it's a no-no, because they're saying, oh, wait a sec, the money is still spouse number 1. It hasn't turned into spouse number 2's money.
One thing I think we need to make sure everyone understands. So, Steph, let's say somebody is going to fund their FHSA using RRSP. They're going to transfer money. We should not be pulling money out from the RRSP into our personal hands and then taking that money and dropping it into the FHSA, right? Because otherwise that becomes taxable income, to my understanding. So what's the right way to be making these transfers?
Yeah, that's right. You want to do a direct transfer. So whatever institution you're housing these registered accounts in, they'll have a transfer request form. So you have to fill out the appropriate paperwork. And this is not uncommon that people will, I'll take some money out of my RRSP and transfer it over to here or something like that. You can do it, but please don't take the money out and bring it into your personal hands, like your personal checking account, because you're right. Then it's deemed an RRSP withdrawal, taxable income. You might be able to backpedal and have your institution help you out and correct that error. But ultimately, it has to be a direct transfer from, for example, your RRSP right into your first home savings account. The whole time that money is protected and shielded under that label of being in a registered account.
Steph, let's go to the investment side of things. I know this will be interesting to many. So maybe give us a rundown of eligible investments for an FHSA, and then maybe just talk to us about strategies. Like, one thing I like to think about is, because if you open an account, from the day you open it, there's essentially a 15-year window. So for me, that time frame is similar to when we open up an RESP for our kids and our kids go to school. So I'm wondering if a similar strategy to how we invest money in our RESP could apply to the FHSA. Whether or not you agree with that, I'd love to hear your take on this. Just give us a little rundown here.
Sure. Yeah, those are great questions. So first of all, there's three basic types of first home savings accounts. So they're starting to roll out now. Some of them are available as of April 1st. So the three different types are, the first one is a depository FHSA. So that's an account you'd open up with a bank, for example. They're going to hold your money in that account for you. You could buy a GIC or some sort of term deposit, and that'll be what you're doing with your money there. Secondly, there's a trusteed FHSA. So that's a trust that you are entrusting to a company who acts as the trustee and holds that account for you. And this is the one we're more familiar with. So if you're a self-directed investor and you have your own RRSP or TFSA, you can have a self-directed first home savings account as well. What can you hold in there? It's basically the same as a TFSA. So you could keep it in cash. You could buy GICs, bonds, stocks, mutual funds, ETFs, securities that are traded publicly on stock exchanges. Those are all eligible for a first home savings account. The third type is an insured FHSA. So that would be provided by a licensed annuity provider under an annuity contract. I haven't seen any of those yet, but that's one of the three categories the CRA is allowing to open up and house FHSAs. I'll also mention here, like with any investment account, be aware of fees and ask questions. So people should, if they're opening up something at a bank, ask those questions. Like, when I do this, are there any asset under management fees? Because you're, helping me with my whole portfolio. Are there any management expense ratios with the product I'm buying? There could be administrative fees, transactional fees. So it's always good to ask those questions. I know a lot of your folks listening are probably self-directed investors. A self-directed account should have pretty minimal fees overall, especially if you're a knowledgeable self-directed investor. So just be aware of that. Yeah, good question, Yatin, about timelines and investing and what might you do with that money. I like your analogy to the RRSP. Of course, for some people, they're putting this money away to buy a house, right? So that might be a very short timeline. It could be 2, 3, 4 years, that sort of thing. But in general, and this can apply to really any type of investment account, we usually break down investment timelines into short, medium, and long term. The time component of each one might be different for different reasons for folks. But in general, if you need money within about 5 years, be conservative. Protect your principal. Don't get too fancy. Don't put it into equities because you're exposing yourself to market volatility. So things like GICs, high interest savings account, money market funds, cash ETFs, those are smart, fairly safe, conservative products. If you're looking at sort of a 6 to 10 year window, well, that's a medium timeline. You could probably take on a little more risk with that. Maybe for somebody that might mean a 60-40 ETF, 60% equities, 40% fixed income. If you're planning longer term, and I call that 10 or more years, you can probably take on more risk with that. As long as it's appropriate and tolerable for you as an investor, that might be 80-20 for someone. It could be 100% equities. I think a lot of this too ties in with your flexibility with regards to your timeline. If you have a very rigid timeline, play it safe. If you're flexible, you could maybe take on a little more risk. And what I mean by that is, if you're focused on buying a house, if you take a little more risk and you put some more money into equity markets, are you willing to delay your house purchase? If something happens, markets drop 20, 30, 40%, are you okay putting your plans on pause? If you're not, well, don't do that. If you are, maybe you could take on a little more risk.
I think that's so practical. Thanks, Steph. Now, one thing I have not been able to figure out just through my own reading is, and this may not be a make or break for other people, but the concept of foreign dividend withholding taxes. We know that the RRSP is exempt from these withholding taxes, but does the same thing apply to the FHSA?
No, it doesn't. So you're correct in the RRSP, foreign withholding tax. Because the U.S. looks at the RRSP as a retirement savings account, they don't apply that foreign withholding tax on dividends. It does apply. So foreign withholding tax will be deducted if your investments are exposed to that in your first home savings account. And that's the same rule that you would see with your tax-free savings account. Another point I'll mention with that sort of train of thought, first home savings account are not afforded creditor protection. So under our Bankruptcy and Insolvency
okay.
Act. Yeah. So if you go bankrupt and you have
Okay.
a first home savings account, that's fair game for creditors. Same with the TFSA, fair game. Your RRSP is protected if you were to declare bankruptcy, for example.
Steph, maybe you can comment on a few other strategies that people may want to be thinking about when it comes to investing within the FHSA or just generally using it. Because as we talked about, some people who are going to be eligible to open this, they may not be buying a home. So how else can we kind of use this plan?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about different strategies for that. Here's a good question, and you posed it as well. So if you're opening up your first home savings account, and let's say you buy a home later on, but you find out you don't need to use that money. Maybe you came across an inheritance or some type of windfall or unexpected money. So a couple of questions would come up with that. Number one, if it's only been within that first 5 years and you go ahead and buy a home, could you still contribute to the first home savings account? And it seems to be the answer is yes, because you didn't use it towards the purchase of the home, but you qualified when you opened it. You can complete the 5-year window and contribute up to $8,000 a year, $40,000 over the 5 years. So it seems like you could do that. I don't know if the CRA will look at that or change the rules, but presently that's the wording that they're using. What if you don't plan to buy a home at all? So you find yourself eligible to open up this account, but you're really not planning to buy a house. Is it still worthwhile to open one? I would argue yes. You should go ahead and make use of this account if you're eligible to get one opened up. Even if your plan becomes a long-term one, that's fine. Fill it up. Go into a long-term time of frame, and then you'll know that at the end of the 15 years, you'll roll it into your RRSP. So like you said earlier, that could kind of give your RRSP a nice boost at some point in the future. Buy some growthy ETFs in there, let them do their thing, and then transfer it over when the time comes. For some folks who are a little bit older, let's say, north of 50, like I find myself now, but let's say you've been renting for 5 or more years, you're still working. You're eligible if you aren't living in a home you own. So why not get this account opened? If you can fund it, you might do so with the intention of simply rolling that into your RRSP and get that nice boost in there. Another little strategy would be for folks to gift money. So if you're thinking about kids or grandkids, money that you gift to someone is after-tax money. The CRA is okay with that. If you gift someone $8,000 and your child or grandchild, assuming they're of the age to open up an FHSA and they're eligible, they can pop that in there. So for folks who are looking to transfer some money generationally, this could be a good option. Same thing for the TFSA. You could do $14,500 a year now for your 20-year-old grandkids if you wanted to.
Interesting. Okay, so parents and grandparents then can contribute to an FHSA for their kids or grandkids, but my understanding is that those contributions generally going to be after-tax dollars. Those are not going to be a tax deduction, right? Correct.
So the parent or the grandparent would not get any tax break on that. It's a gift. You're giving that $8,000. When the kid or the grandkid does make the deposit, they would get the benefit of claiming the deposit against their personal income.
Steph, I can't believe you said you're north of 50 because you're looking great. Like I just got to say, I know you told me by text that you feel great.
Yeah. I don't feel north of 50, but I think we all find ourselves in this situation sooner or later. So it just happens sooner for some of us.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing a great job. Now, Steph, so let's talk a bit about the FHSA versus the RRSP home buyers plan, because we've talked about the RRSP a lot. Maybe you can compare and contrast these two plans and tell us what we need to know here.
Sure. Let's have a little look about that. So the RRSP home buyers plan, what that allows you to do is to withdraw or borrow up to $35,000 from your RRSP to put towards your first home purchase. So that's a bit different. It does have to actually be the first time you buy a home with the RRSP home buyers plan. You can borrow that money. There's no immediate tax consequences, but the deal is you have to pay it back. Otherwise, the CRA says, oh, if you're not going to pay it back, we're going to start allotting that as part of your personal income. So Starting in the second year, you have 15 years to pay back the $35,000 if you borrow the full amount. And if you do that, it's basically a tax-free borrowing and replenishing of your RRSP. Of course, it is a good idea to pay it back because you don't want to lose the RRSP room. You want to get the money back in there and working for the long term. Another good question is, and it's changed from how they originally were wording things, is can you use both the home buyer's plan and the FHSA? The answer is now yes. Originally, they were discussing only letting you use one, but now officially they've said, yep, you can use both. So that's awesome. So you might be able to borrow $35,000 from your RRSP, get up to $40,000 or more in your first home savings account with growth, and all of a sudden you have $75,000 towards a down payment. If you're going in with a partner on that, that could be $150,000 or more towards a down payment.
Yeah, when you add those numbers up like that, like some people have said, with the supply-demand mismatch for our housing market here, I mean, how much is this plan going to allow people to achieve? But when you break the numbers down like that, and if you have a spouse or partner who's also eligible, you've got $150,000 to go in on a down payment, which is certainly pretty sizable. So that's really good to know. Now, home buyer's plan. So you have to start paying it back in the second year, you said, and you have 15 years to pay it back. Is that 15 years from the year you start to pay it back or from the year you pulled it out? That's something I've never been entirely clear on.
Yeah, it starts in the second year. So basically from year 2 to what is actually year 16, you have to pay a minimum of 1/15 of the amount you borrowed. You can pay it back faster, but you have to meet the minimum so that it doesn't get deemed income on your tax return.
Now, later in life, let's say you have an FHSA and let's say the unfortunate happens. Let's say one passes away. What are the implications there?
Yeah, so that, some people are, of course, will face that at some point. So what happens to a first home savings account if the person holding the account passes away? A couple of good points here. Number one, so if you've got a spouse or a common in-law partner, you can name them either the successor holder or the beneficiary of your FHSA. I always recommend going with the successor holder designation, and this also applies for the TFSA. Don't name them the beneficiary. The reason for it is that if you or your spouse passes away and you're a qualified individual, you'll get their FHSA. So it will stay as an FHSA. You might even have your own. Now you have two, in essence, that continue to grow tax-free. And if you use it to buy a home, again, tax-free withdrawals if that goes towards your down payment. If you are named a beneficiary and not the successor holder, you won't get the account. You'll get the money, and that one of two things will happen. Either you can transfer it into your own RRSP, which is good, deferring taxes, or if you take the money, it will be taxed as part of that person's final estate. So you'll expose it to taxes. So go with successor holder. If you have a spouse or common in-law partner, it just gives you more tax-friendly options down the road if something tragic like that happens.
Very helpful, Steph. So I think those are all my questions on the FHSA. Like, hopefully we've kind of covered it all. But I just want to make sure, is there anything we missed at all, whether it's on the FHSA? And then, Steph, I also do want to give you a chance to just leave us with any last words, whether it's on the FHSA or anything else, because after following you for years on PFI, I do find you to be very well thought out. So I want to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Yatin. I appreciate that. I want to talk a bit more about withdrawing from the FHSA, because earlier on I mentioned that there's sort of two distinct things. You can qualify to open the account, but you also have to be a qualifying person to make a withdrawal. So if you at one point were able to open the account, great, you've been filling it, working on it. When or how do you qualify to make a withdrawal? You have to apply the same rules. When you go to make the withdrawal, you still have to look back and say, for the last 5 years, I've not owned a home that I've lived in as a primary residence, nor has my spouse or partner owned a home that I've lived in. Okay. And I'll give you a couple of examples where you might be eligible to open the account, but not to withdraw from it.
Okay.
So let's say you open up your account. 2 years later, you inherit a home for some reason. Okay. You get a home and you decide to move into it. And you live in there as your primary residence. So even though you've filled up your FHSA, you're not eligible to make a withdrawal if you decide to purchase another home. Now, you could sell that home and then have 5 years clear without owning and living in it. You would then qualify to make the withdrawal. Another example would be, you qualify to open the account. Suddenly, 3 years later, you find yourself in a relationship and you're getting married, and then you're moving into a house that's owned by your now common law partner or spouse. Now you're ineligible. You can't use or make a qualifying withdrawal. So it's the same qualifications, but they have to be applied at those two different times, once to open and once to withdraw. Oh, a couple other notes.
So I'm so glad. Please. I have a few other questions on withdrawals. I'm so glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
Because I just got carried away with the investing and all the other stuff. So go on though. You go first and then I'll follow up.
Yeah. So if you qualify to make the withdrawal, people usually say, well, do I have to pull it all out at once? Is there timelines? There's answers to that. So no, you don't have to withdraw the whole sum at once. You can do multiple withdrawals. But there is a clock that will start ticking on you. Okay. So once I'm going to buy a house or build a house, I'm going to make my first withdrawal. When you do that, a new clock starts, and you have to then make all the withdrawals and close the account by December 31st of the following year. So basically, it's kind of a 1 to 2 year window, depending on when you make that first withdrawal, that you have to wrap it up. When you make a withdrawal, again, don't just pull the money out. There's a specific form that you have to fill out that explains that you're going to use it towards the home purchase. So again, be cautious. There is some paperwork to do. The other thing too is, let's say you find a house and you find yourself purchasing a house quicker than you thought. Don't forget to use the FHSA, because if you purchase the home, another clock starts ticking. You only have 30 days to get the money out. So that's a pretty short window. So I don't want people to just forget and be like, oh, it was 6 weeks ago we bought the house and I never pulled the money out of my FHSA. It would be too late at that time. So yeah, most people won't forget.
Okay, that's really helpful. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Now, Steph, let's say you have an account, an FHSA, and you are saying, we're going to use this towards buying a home. And then let's say, the plan is to buy a home, you make your first couple of withdrawals. I mean, once you make those withdrawals, for those to be eligible, do you not have to buy a home or move into that house by like October of the following year? Like, isn't there some kind of timeline there as well?
There is. Yeah. It's October 1st of the following year. So you have to have the intent to build and move into the house by October 1st of the following year. So that's not as critical as a detail, as long as the intention is there, because again, you're going to fill out paperwork and allow you to take those withdrawals out, that sort of thing. So
Steph, I think that pretty much covers it, but did you want a chance to just leave us with any other words, any other messages as we wrap up?
A couple other sort of strategic thoughts around this account, Yatin.
Yeah, please.
And this is, again, not gonna apply to a majority of people, of course. But for example, similar to an RRSP, you could potentially use this account, if you qualify to open it, for income smoothing, because a lot of physicians sort of talk about that if they know perhaps they're going to have a parental leave coming up, or they're planning a sabbatical. If you know you have a low income year coming up and you end up not using the FHSA for a home purchase, you are allowed to withdraw the money. Now, you're going to get taxed at your marginal tax rate, but if it's for the purpose of helping fund a low income year, maybe that might make sense in some circumstances, depending on that situation. So that's one possibility in terms of sort of thinking outside the box with this. Parental leave, sabbatical, travel years, there's a possible option there. Something else in terms of strategy, what if somebody finds himself with a reasonable TFSA account, and again, struggling to find extra money to put in their first home savings account? If you're eligible to open that account, you might want to consider taking money out of your TFSA to fill the first home savings account. What's the advantage of doing that? Well, you'll get a tax break on the first home savings account contribution to be used when you want. Secondly, you're going to regain the TFSA contribution room that you took out, the money you took out following January 1st of the next calendar year. So you're not going to permanently lose the TFSA room. It will come back to you. Whereas the first home savings account, there's a finite window for most of us, especially if you do plan to purchase and live in a principal residence. So that's something to consider. You might be able to make use of the FHSA and then in the future, replenish your TFSA to do that. So that's another sort of strategic way you might be able to use it.
Steph, I can tell you thought about this plan a lot. And like I say, I hadn't even heard about it until you started to share information on it. And when I look at it, we've talked about the plan for about 40 minutes. I mean, thanks to your research and you helping us do a deep dive here. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. And I just really want to thank you for making the time for me and sharing all this information for our listeners, because there are going to be a lot of Canadians out there, physicians and beyond, who are going to be eligible for this plan. So Steph, I want to really thank you for your time and the information you've given us.
Oh, my pleasure, Yatin. It's got to be on our radars, right? It's an important account. It's not going to be as widespread as people who can access RRSP and TFSAs, but for those who qualify, it needs to be on our radars. I'll say sort of in closing from my end, as Canadians, we love to complain about taxes. Yes, taxes suck, but of course they have a functional purpose in our country, right? So what can we do to help combat that battle of, being taxed and sometimes at a very high rate as physicians would be? Well, you got to play by the rules, but you can also play the game, right? So let's take advantage of the ways the government has provided to us to either save on or defer taxes. So that's going to be primarily registered accounts, right? RRSPs, TFSAs, and now the first home savings account. So if you're able to open an account and you have the ability to fund it, you should really do it. Be wise in your strategy, take the tax breaks when you can. Whether or not you end up buying a house with the FHSA money, it's definitely an account you want to make use of if you're eligible for it. So get it open, start filling it, invest wisely, do it in an evidence-based manner, and enjoy the benefits.
All right. Wise words from Steph Scott. Steph, I think that's a great place to wrap this up. And hopefully our next conversation will be in person. Next time I'm on the island, I will let you know.
Well, thank you, Yatin. I've appreciated this. I look forward to getting together in person. And I just want to thank you. A lot of my clients and friends, we just love your podcast. So you're doing a great service for our community. You're bringing all this diverse information. That's just been wonderful. So thank you. I know you love doing it because you're learning as you go, which is the beautiful thing. And then when you teach others, it just reinforces that learning. So thanks. Keep up the great work. And I know you're busy.
I appreciate that, Steph.
Yeah.
No, I really do appreciate that. Like every time somebody shares something like that with me, I really do value it. So thank you. All right, Steph, have a good one. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Yatin. Thanks again. Take care.
I wholeheartedly agree with Steph's closing words that taxes definitely do suck, and let's be tax efficient where we can. Recent article published by Tim Sesnick in the Globe and Mail showed that this tax season, there will be over $21 billion in refunds given to Canadians. 63% of tax returns generated a refund. The average refund was $1,741. I myself am not getting a refund this year, but maybe next year will be better. I truly love making this podcast, and if you like what you're hearing, I'd be so grateful if you could share Beyond MD with 2 people in your network. Reach out to me anytime at beyondmdpodcast@gmail.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and we will see you in about 3 weeks' time. Until then, stay well, stay savvy.